Hello and welcome back to another technical how-to video. So currently with object-first clusters, you have a limit of 4 nodes. But what if you need to scale beyond the maximum capacity of a 4-node cluster? Well, lucky for us, Veeam has built an innovation years ago called the Veeam scale-out-backup repository. This is how we can leverage multiple 4-node clusters with an object-first and Veeam deployment to scale all the way up to 7 petabytes. So Geoff, within the Veeam scale-out repo, there's a few different tiers. We've got performance tier, capacity tier, archive tier. Let's break down some of the differences, how you can place object first in each of these locations, and what some of the settings look like within the Veeam interface. So why don't you show us the wizard and let's dive right in.
Yeah, man. And the funny thing is, people ask me, well, why do they call it the performance tier? And I was kind of thinking, well, that's a good question because, well, it's the closest one, right? So you want it to perform the best. That's the way I memorized it. So here's our scale out repository. And this is just a little simple one I built because it's simpler to display, easier to understand. So a scale out repository, as you said, is made up of different components, and you can have multiple pieces of these components. So if we go to scale out repositories and then right click on the properties, we will get the same wizard that we had when we set it up, which is something I love about Veeam because you don't get some other view that confuses you. You go right back to where you were before, much easier to remember and understand. So we press properties. You'll see right here on the left-hand side, performance tier, capacity tier, archive tier. All of these make up a scale-out backup repository. So let's go to performance tier, and I've got one, but I could have multiple in here. So if you run out of space local, you need more, you can add them in. And as you said, Object First supports this, so we could keep adding Object First buckets to expand our local performance. So I could add another one. I'm not going to now, but it would show up here. There's advanced as well. This I don't touch because basically it's by default, which often happens with Veeam, is the best setting. Hence, with Object First, you don't need to fiddle or touch anything. By default, we work optimally, not optionally, with Veeam. Okay, you move on to capacity tier. This gets a bit more complicated, but don't be worried. It's all very simple. What is a capacity tier? It's an extension to the performance tier. You're adding on. Now, originally, this was kind of seen as and still can be, a way to offload to the cloud. Your capacity tier could be on S3 somewhere else, so VDC, or it could be another Object First bucket somewhere else, or it could be local. So a lot of flexibility, Matt. And let's take a look at this. Same thing, you choose and you get a list from your backups. Now, your repositories. Keep in mind, to be able to add in here, you have to add these first as normal backup repositories. You add them there first, and then you choose from there. Now, Matt, I'm going to ask you a question because some people say, well, wait a minute. There's copy backups to object storage as soon as they're created, and then there's move to object storage. Like, I'm confused. So can you help us out with that?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely, Geoff. And before we dive into that, I just want to make sure we level set, just in case there's any viewers out there who don't know what the Veeam scale-out backup repository actually is. Essentially, it's an abstraction layer over actual physical repositories. So why that matters, when you create your Veeam jobs, you'll no longer be targeting individual repository targets. Instead, you target the abstraction layer, the actual Veeam scale-out repository. And this is how we allow multiple object-first clusters to essentially be pooled together as one logical target inside the Veeam ecosystem, right? So just a quick definition of kind of what the scale-out repository is used for. And if we go back to the wizard, Geoff, that you had up already, when we talk about the different tiers, it's important to note that you don't actually have to enable capacity tier at all. It is a checkbox at the very top. So technically speaking, you could have a scale-out repository with multiple performance tiers, and that be the end of it, right? So if you're talking about a deployment where you need the capacity, but it's all on premise and you don't have any desire to offload it to multiple sites, you do have the ability to leave capacity tier disabled. However, if you're following 321 and you get this data offsite as designed by best practices, you certainly want to turn this on. And this is what leads us to the question that Geoff asked a second ago about what's the difference between copy mode and move mode. So essentially, they're self-explanatory to an extent. Copy is going to immediately copy. As soon as the backup job completes writing to the performance tier, Veeam is going to then make a copy over to this capacity tier. So this is designed to happen in concert. So once one job completes and it's complete in Veeam, snapshots are removed, etc., then Veeam will kick off this secondary tiering task to copy it over to the capacity tier. Now, doesn't move anything. It literally just creates a copy. So everything that was on the performance tier will be on the capacity tier. Think about, rsync in the old days, right? So moving forward to the move option, and keep in mind, these are optional checkboxes. You could have copy only, you could do move only, or you could do copy and move. Now the move will actually do what it says. It will literally take the data, move it from the performance tier over to the capacity tier, thus freeing up additional capacity back on your performance tier. And that's why you have this box here, Geoff, where you can enter the number of days before, that move happens. So essentially move the files that are older than X number of days. So kind of like a retention, but for your capacity tier.
Yeah, and one thing I want to point out, which is sometimes misunderstood, is that if you choose only to use the move, in other words, basically a space-saving operation you're performing, because you want to, as soon as you start to run out of space, you want more space on your performance tier. Keep in mind, though, that Veeam has to keep an active chain on the performance tier. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, if we do a full backup on Monday, and let's say Tuesday, Wednesday are incrementals, and let's say it's a small chain like 3, well, that will never get moved because Veeam's saying, okay, if I need to restore, that has to be there. But let's say we have like a 6-day retention, but on the 3rd day, I do a synthetic full. So you can do a synthetic full. Now, keep in mind with object storage, the way to do this is to have like a weekly or something like that, because there are no synthetic fulls of object storage, but you can say, okay, I want to have a weekly GFS, grandfather, father, son, retention point. That will create a synthetic full. Well, everything, including that synthetic full, would be kept on disk once the other active restore is no longer the active. In other words, it would be moved off, right? So it can get complicated, but just remember this. You have to be able to restore from your local performance tier. So it has to keep that chain. And if you have like a 90-day chain and you say, well, move stuff off after 14 days, it's never going to move anything off if you don't have that synthetic in there. In other words, it doesn't have that copy. So that's just a little point. To be honest, though, I think nowadays a lot of people are mainly using this for copying, so as a redundancy option. So in other words, to comply with a Veeam 3-2-1 rule, because it's very simple. You know that every time a backup takes place, automatically that'll be copied off site. One caveat though, and I've seen this when I was dealing with production, you have to make certain that your internet bandwidth can handle this. Because what I have seen happen is people go a little bit too crazy with the copy everything, and they don't have the bandwidth. And so it just never is able to get everything off site. So keep that in mind, one little caveat. Apart from that, we have this override, Matt, which you might want to talk to.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So this kind of goes back to capacity. So if you need to move the data sooner than certain number of days, you can actually set the use space capacity % remaining. And, if you enable this, it's going to look at that performance tier and look at the % remaining. And this is what's going to trigger a move operation. But keep in mind, like you said, Geoff, you've got to keep in check those chains. And essentially, you don't want to set a shorter window here with your move setting than your actual retention setting. Because again, if you're not running those synthetics, like you just said, it'll never happen. So that's just one additional checkbox that you could, enable. And finally, Geoff, we can't go past the screen without talking about encryption. You always want to encrypt your backup data wherever it may go. And this is yet another place where you can encrypt this data. Now, keep in mind, what I think is unique here is you do have the ability to have different encryption passwords from your source backup data in your initial preliminary Veeam job that lands on the performance tier and this capacity tier. So perhaps you're trying to implement, additional parameters and additional checks and balances with your security posture. You can actually have one encryption password for on-prem backups and in a different, encryption password for off-prem backups. And you do have the ability to tweak that right there,
Yeah.
Geoff.
Another thing to mention too, and this did come up in the past, now with internet getting better or faster, it might not be such an issue. But for instance, for some companies during the working hours, they can't have an offload taking place, especially if it's a lot of data. So you do have this window, and right now I've got it set to any time. But let's say it's just impossible for me to be transferring data between, 9 and 5 on a Monday. You can just remove this, or you put denied, and then it will, oops, gotta do it this way. You just have to click it and set it to I did Sunday there, but you get the idea. That means that between 10 and 2, these tiering jobs, they call them tiering jobs, the offload from the performance tier to the capacity tier will be disallowed or denied. So that's important to mention. Another thing you should always think about are the health checks. Health checks are important. By default, monthly, every Saturday. I think that's probably fine, but you could theoretically do it once a week. These do, though, slow things down slightly. I think on object storage, they're light, they're called, if I remember correctly. But just a thing to keep in mind. Integrity checks are a good thing to have.
Yep. Absolutely. And the final tier, Geoff, that we can briefly mention is the archive tier. So when you think about the 3 tiers that we see here in the Scale Out Backup repository, think about it as fastest, closest to the Veeam server, which is your performance tier. Capacity tier can really be anything. This could technically be another storage device, like another UTB, right in the same rack as the primary UTB for a secondary copy of your data. This does not mean that it must be off-site. It can be off-site. It could be at your DR location. It could be in the cloud. It could be in the same rack. So there's a lot of flexibility there, but that's your secondary target. Your tertiary target is going to be the archive tier, which is designed to be that cold storage, the cheap and deep, essentially the tape replacements in the cloud. And you can see here that we've got a few options in the Veeam wizard that you could add in for that long-term, last line of defense, what if type scenarios, Geoff.
Yeah. And these tend to be tape as well. You can tell because the retention or the time to recall, normally, I can't remember on AWS, depends on the agreement, but I think it's like 2 days or it's something like that. It's like you can't get it back right away because it actually can be on a tape. Have I seen this used a lot? Not a lot, but it is there. You also, by the way, can use separate encryption for this as well. So keep in mind, at every stage, you could have separate encryption, and perhaps your company policy requires you to have different passwords on all the different locations. So that's important to mention.
Yeah, and Geoff, if you click on the storage tab before we go any further, one of the nice checkboxes that's actually enabled by default, we just wanted to make a quick call out to, is this secondary checkbox. And this is a cost-saving endeavor. So essentially what Geoff is just talking about is a lot of these providers, because of the type of storage, you actually will incur a penalty if you do a lot of frequent changes like writes and deletes within a certain time period. And typically that might be 90 or 180 days. And when you add in your target, it will pull in that parameter. And this checkbox is enabled by default, like I said. So this will prevent any premature deletions based on the pruning and deletions of the retention policy within this SOBR, if it's going to this archive tier that would otherwise incur an additional cost. So just one more way that Veeam has, got your back as far as the cost of this really long-term, cheap and deep storage that could be costly if you're doing too many reads and writes too frequently.
Definitely. So that pretty much settles it for the scale out backup. One thing I wanted to show you, or repository that is that let's say you've set this up and it's brand new, or you've just added a scale out repository. or you've just added a capacity tier to your scale out repository, better said, and you want to try to move data out as soon as possible for whatever reason. This might be copy everything right away, or you need to free up space. You normally have to wait, and I can't remember what the polling is, like 2 hours. But if you're really impatient like me, you can highlight the repository, the scale out repository, control, and then run tiering job now. And so that's a secret. You won't see that in the UI, but if you press control, you'll see it. And so that'll run it if there's something to send off. Now you'll say, well, how do I know if that was successful or not? Where do I see results? Because it's not like a normal job in the sense you don't go to the job and see successful. Well, if you go to history, you can actually see this, and it's called the offload. So it's actually going to show it by job name, and that's the SOBR tiering. So there it is, SOBR tiering. See, it failed at first because I did something silly, and then I corrected it and it worked. And if you go to statistics, you get a report as well. You see something very similar to what you would see with a backup job. And keep in mind, look at this, S3 protocol extension supported. That's SOS API, Veeam's special sauce. So that's where you'll see it in history. Matt, is there anything else you want to mention about these fantastic scale out repositories?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've covered a lot, Geoff. The other thing that I would just make a comment and mention here is the whole purpose of the scale out repository is to be that abstraction layer, like I said. And when you think about a large scale Veeam deployment, you're going to have potentially tons of jobs that you've carefully architected with retention policies, encryption settings, SLA requirements, job schedules, all these types of parameters. And when you build out that job architecture, rather than targeting a single repo, you're now simply targeting a SOBR. Now, why is that important? Because then you can manage the underlying storage on the back end without disrupting your job configuration. And here's an example, Geoff. Let's say you've got 5 extents included in a scale out repository. One of them fails, or one of them you want to remove because it's end of life. Guess what? If that was the original way and you had all those jobs targeting that repository, now what do you do, right? Because you'd have to go change those jobs to a new repo before you could delete it because of that lineage. Now with this abstraction layer, you can actually remove that extent, bring in a new extent, rerun that you just talked about, the tiering, so it'll balance. And Veeam never knew any different, or the end users never knew any different, because you didn't have to go change those job parameters. And for me, that's really one of the I guess, hidden gems of using the scale out repos. It's not that you necessarily have to do all the tiers for every scale out repo. You may have scale out repos for different use cases. One could be a SOBR for on-prem data. Another might be a SOBR for on and DR targeted data. And then perhaps you've got another one that leverages all the tiers. So it's very flexible, but it's a highly useful capability because it's transparent to the jobs, because once you target that SOBR, you don't ever have to go back to the job and make any changes. You just change it on the back end. I love that about it, Geoff.
Yeah, and what I also mentioned here, because sometimes people ask, like, why would I have different scale out repositories? Well, let's say geographically, you have different locations. Well, you can set locations. Important thing to remember, you can actually set locations and then have policies so that they don't move. So this could be things with compliance of, okay, you have to keep data in a certain location or a certain city or something. So you can do it that way as well. Also keep in mind that it's very good for maintenance purposes, because there's all sorts of things you can do. Yeah. You can seal extents. So if one of my extents is getting too big, and I want to force to make sure nothing more goes there, I can actually do this seal extent. I can put it into maintenance mode. And I actually, remember, you can move backups too. Now that's a bit of a long process at times, but it is capable of doing. So because all our backup jobs now have per VM file, so it used to be the backup job had one big chain. Now they have each backup job, each VM has its own chain. So you can move things, and that way you can slowly rebalance if you want on your own by moving backups. But basically, it's a great thing for administrators. It frees you up and for being able to do a lot of tasks, which before, if they were even doable, were very difficult and complicated.
Absolutely love it, Geoff. I think we've covered all things Veeam Scale Out Backup Repo, all the different tiers, all the different use cases, the settings. Thank you guys so much for watching the video, and please stay tuned for additional technical how-to videos in this series, and we'll see you on the next one.